Indeed.
So I think we're going to go to Bianca now. Let's see, line 4. Hey, Bianca, you're in Los Angeles. Hi, this is Tracie.
Hi, Tracie. Hi, Phil. I'm very excited to be on today.
Thank you.
I've been only listening for a couple of weeks, but I've been binge watching for the last little while.
I've been there.
Very, very, very enjoyable. I really like listening to your show, but I wish the callers would learn a little bit more about, logical fallacies and things before they call in, because many of the things are very obvious.
All right. So you have a story to tell, sounds like.
I do. So I was raised Catholic. Then I became an atheist at 18 after a very bad experience and having a priest tell me that, God has a plan. I said, well, if God has a plan, then screw that plan. So,
that's a crappy plan. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very crappy plan, especially to say somebody who's, been victimized so recently. And I was really into religious studies directly after that. I studied all sorts of faith, but from a mythological standpoint, not from a religious belief standpoint.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So I went around just being myself, being myself, and I met a man who was kind of a new age hippie musician, but still deep down a Christian and a theist.
Okay.
And we bonded on our understanding of mythology and its influence on religion, and seeing that religions may not be true, but the ideas and the philosophies that they have can be interpreted and used in a positive way for our lives, which is so generic to say, but
no, I understand what you're saying.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. But as we got closer and closer and became engaged, it got worse and worse. He started describing himself as one of the people who were going to bring about the next coming of Christ.
Wow, that's a big leap.
That escalated quite quickly.
Okay.
Huge leap from, let's meditate and do some yoga to, I'm going to help Jesus come, and Jesus is actually a yogi, and he was in India, and he was a Hindu and all that. We joined the Self-Realization Fellowship Church, which I left because, I should add, the reason that our relationship took off so quickly is because I was diagnosed with a immunological disease called myalgic encephalomyelitis about 4 months into our relationship. I became bedbound, and it was one of those things where he took care of me, and anything he did was fine because he was going to stay with me, despite having a shortened lifespan, despite being bedbound, having all these neurological issues,
Yeah. So you were in a vulnerable place.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I divorced him as soon as he started, whacking me around and saying, I would say, man of God wouldn't hit his wife, and he'd, throw me against the wall and say, don't ever say that. Okay. Well, I'm gone. Well, my point is that I'm struggling throwing away some of the beliefs that I'm still holding on to from that time period, and I have these rationalizations based on science and Buddhism and my current understanding 3 years on, kind of adding up my theism and atheism and trying to understand, and I just have some ideas I'd like to talk about.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I don't mean to keep rambling on. If there's,
why
anything
don't
you'd like to add.
why don't we pick one?
Why don't we pick one,
and we'll talk a little bit about that.
Sure. And then I'd like to actually build upon what one of the earlier callers was talking about, near-death experiences. Having a shortened lifespan, having to come to grips with dying really changes who you are as a person. And that's really terrifying, the idea that could be just nothing afterwards. Mm-hmm. But if we know that in near-death experiences, we are experiencing the DMT, the chemical in our brain, creating a dream, and we know that these dreams can last very long times. I mean, having PTSD, I've had dreams go on for weeks and weeks weeks. And if I'm going to have that experience when I die, I want to do everything that I can to prepare for that and not have a bad DMT trip at the end of my life, you know? And I think a lot of the Buddhist things that I'm learning are very esoteric. They don't talk about God as a being. They talk about this experience and how bad it is, and I just want to prepare for it, you know?
I guess, I mean, I'm not sure that I would be an interesting thing to research, I guess. It would be a difficult ethical thing to research, but I guess you could take groups of people and have them do certain things and see if it correlates at least to a better near-death experience for those who have a near-death experience, and see if there's some way to maybe exit on a high note. But you'd kind of have to be a very small group of people. I think that first of all, I don't know. I mean, you'd have to get people that wouldn't quite die. And I don't know that there's a way to kind of guarantee that.
But we do have studies showing that there are parts of our minds that are activated when we go into meditative states, and that these mind states are also present in comas and near-death experiences and REM sleep. And if we have that kind of scientific backing behind that experience, I mean, isn't it possible that that's also backed up by the actual God that is in some way connected to that part of our brain? I mean, if all religions, like, create that.
Stop probably right
there.
Yeah,
I guess, you kind of lost me there. What I'm wondering, I guess, is what it seems to me like what you're saying is that, you know, let's say that some percentage of us, we don't know what percentage, have this outgoing dream. We have this experience that is now currently labeled the near-death experience. And some people report a really, really nasty one, and some people have a really good one, kind of like a trip, right? Some people have a good trip, some people have a not so good trip. And so the question would be, is there things that I can do during my life before I hit that point that would result in a good trip as opposed to a bad trip on my way out the door? And the answer is I don't know. And I think that trying to find that out could be done, but you'd need a huge sample size in order to snag the few people that are going to have a near-death experience and then come back and say they had a good or not good experience. And I guess the other problem you have is that when they're coming back, like when a person is, you know, conscious again and talking about this, we're having to trust that their memory of the experience is actually accurate, right? So did they really have this bad experience, or is this just something that they think they remember? And I mean, it's such a tough thing to try and tease out. I think it's much too large in scope for this show.
Sure. I'd like to tie it back then into the more demonstratable and testable realm with the EKG I was mentioning earlier with the brainwaves. They've done these studies on people who are in deep, deep meditative states, Buddhist monks who can lower their body temperature, who can lower their heart rate, and we know these things have a physical effect on our bodies. Isn't it worth then maybe studying some of these techniques? You know, even though they come from a religious background and they use phrases like God.
I think it's worth it to you if this is something that interests you. I mean, it's sort of like lucid dreaming, right? Like I did a lot of reading on lucid dreaming, and I induced some lucid dreams in myself, and it was an interesting experience. Now, I have some friends who are so into it, they just love it. They do it all the time now. I kind of just wanted to try it, and I tried it, and I was like, it's kind of interesting, and it would be cool to do more things with it, but it takes a lot of investment for me because I don't do it easily. So when it comes to something like that, I have to look at it, and if somebody were to say, well, shouldn't people do this? My answer is, if they're interested in it, yes. And so if a person is interested in something, if you want to learn to control your heart rate, I mean, people can do that even if they're not yogis, right? We can all bring our heart rates down, sometimes by simply doing relaxation techniques and cognitive behavioral therapies or whatever you call it, where they do the feedback or whatever. It's a different thing. I know I've used the wrong label, but the point is, you can do all kinds of things to yourself if you want to, but you have to kind of be motivated in that direction. And if you find it interesting and you're motivated to experiment with it, I would say it's probably not going to hurt you, so go for it.
Right. As far as research
Yeah.
overall, that
Yeah,
I mean,
of
it's
course.
not necessarily a bad thing. Especially if there's a link, if there's research that shows, hey, there's a link if you do this certain exercise that it has this effect on the body. Like, I wouldn't be adverse to more research being done. It's that we will learn more about ourselves and how our bodies work. That's with further science. I mean, that's. I'll be all for it.
I have no objections ethically to such research. So, I think
that's the next phase of understanding for religion in our world is understanding the biological effects that religion has on our bodies and trying to separate the good from the bad. The bad being, the economic.
I wouldn't necessarily phrase it as
I wouldn't call it religion
effect.
having an effect.
It sounds like
this is different kinds of rituals or activities that have an effect on you. I mean, you don't have to be religious to do these things.
I guess that's where I'm having trouble separating the religion from the ritual.
Well, you know that people can meditate, right? People go practice yoga that have no religious views about it, right? Yoga is like a good exercise technique that many people use that they're not religiously involved with.
Oh, absolutely. And I, of course, have no problem with that. That's wonderful. I just, in my mind, when I do it, it's hard for me to stop doing the God thing, when I'm meditating and when I'm feeling connected and feeling these wonderful feelings that meditation can bring. It's hard for me not to be grateful to some God form, even though consciously I know it's not there. It's really hard.
This is a really good segue for one of the topics that I wanted to talk about earlier in the show. So let me just real quickly bring this up because this call just now reminded me of it. So I started watching these two shows on Netflix. One was called Fear Files and one was called Paranormal Survivors. Paranormal Survivors was very interesting to me because the stories themselves to me aren't even compelling paranormal stories. Right? So somebody will tell a story, like one guy told a story about how he moved to a new town when he was little. He started playing with this little boy. They used to hang out at this abandoned house and just kind of play around. One day he comes and he plays with his little friend. They find this axe. And the little boy convinces him to try to chop a piece of wood with it. The axe kind of rebounds. He gets hit in the eye, and he's badly injured. He runs home. They have to take him to the hospital, and he's blinded. And his story is that he now believes the little boy was like a spirit boy and wasn't like a real kid. And I'm kind of like, how is that a paranormal story, right? This is a story about someone who had a little playmate that they ran around this abandoned house all the time, and then one of them got hurt, and then he never saw the kid again because he never wanted to see the kid again. And that was a paranormal story. So if he chooses to frame it that way, then that's how it's going to be framed for him in his head. He's going to see this as a paranormal story. Many of the stories in Paranormal Survivors are this kind of story where something happens and you're kind of watching it going, where's the paranormal part? And the paranormal part is that they're ascribing paranormal causes to events that I would normally say are just like someone tried to steal your car or that was an intruder trying to get in your front door. These are things that for me are not have anything to do with paranormal. But for these people in the stories, these are paranormal stories. And so what you're kind of describing is a situation where you're having certain experiences and you're doing these things and you're practicing this meditation and you are basically observing mind states and looking at yourself internally in a more conscious way, like trying to be more aware of your internal states. And I think that's perfectly fine. Intrapersonal communication is all about how you communicate within yourself. It's a very handy tool. And I think that what you're basically describing is the situation where you have these things and you're used to framing them in a way that's God, whereas these people were framing in a way that was paranormal. And you do have to do some work to try, if you want to separate that out, just like most people, I think, when they leave a religion, there's a whole, it's not like one day they say, oh, there's no such thing as God, and then suddenly everything that they were indoctrinated with just melts away. It doesn't work that way. People have to work really hard, often for many years and often for a lifetime, to try and untease all the things that were put into their heads through religious indoctrination that have absolutely nothing to do with the existence of a God.
Yeah, within that same vein, I remember experiences when I was in church, especially when it was time for the music to happen, which is the part of the church that I love the most. I loved that portion. But anyway, I remember there's a song happening, something usually high high paced, it's very fast. You know, it's a very fun song, but you know, I can remember closing my eyes and, you know, feeling euphoric within that, you know, everyone around me was up on their feet, you know, people are clapping, you know, there's tambourines and drums going or whatever else. It's this big experience that I have. But when I was in religion, I attributed that to just that experience. And when I asked people like my parents or someone else, they would say that, oh, you know, that was, you know, the Lord entering your spirit, you know, through the song or something like that. And that's the way I grew up, and that's the way I trained myself really to think about that experience. But when I was an atheist, at least I knew I was an atheist at this point, I remember having that same experience with a certain song. I have to look it up. It's on my phone. But it was just an amazing individual playing like a 6 or 7 string guitar. And I remember tearing up. I remember crying because it was such a good song that I just wasn't ready for it. First time hearing it, you know, everything, I just wasn't ready for it. And it was that same sort of feeling. And so it was at that time having that experience, which really stands out to me even to this day, this was years ago, let me know that that experience was not just within the realm of this is the Lord doing this, or this was the Holy Spirit, you know, moving me on the inside. This was the way that I react to music that I feel really touches me and that I really enjoy. And so that's how I started to begin dissociating music and the way that it makes you feel within a church setting, and kind of putting it on the same level with music that I experience that same feeling with, that's not religious or not in a church setting, that I can just enjoy in the same way, but it has no reference to the Lord or anything else. Even by myself, I can still have that experience.
Right, just like we've ascribed that feeling to God, just because we've ascribed that feeling to God for the last, 3,000 years doesn't mean it's actually caused by it. We know that that's just the feeling that we get when we enter into these states. Yeah, I appreciate that. I had the exact same experience in Catholicism. Was the music made me believe. The music made me believe that there was a God.
Yeah, and there's really good music there. Like, it's not to poo-poo on that. Like, there's amazing music that comes out of a lot of the old music from the Baroque era. Like, a lot of stuff was commissioned by the church, and it's some amazing music out there. But the reason I think it's amazing, or that I get that euphoric feeling when I listen to it and really kind of soak into the music, is not necessarily because there's a deity that exists or anything else. It's just I really enjoy that music, and it seems to be a part of maybe the human condition. Maybe that's just my experience, but it's an amazing feeling, and no God required.
Yeah, I'm really curious about that, whether or not it is universal in all humans to have that feeling when we reach that, or if it's a personal, subjective thing. I would hope that people would be researching that in the future.
I doubt that it's universal. I've been doing a lot of reading on dismissive avoidant personalities and also alexithymia and some of the extreme versions of that. So I think that there are people who have a whole different understanding of how
they those words again?
Alexithymia is people who it's literally translates to having some way to having difficulty describing your emotions. But some of the people that have it, their experience of emotion is completely different than there's a reason they have difficulty describing it. It's because they don't experience emotions we don't always experience them in clear-cut ways either. We can be confused about our emotions. But a lot of times we have very clear emotional responses, and they very seldom have that. And then for dismissive avoidance, they actually have emotional feedback that is demonstrated to go up through their brain. Like, they'll have higher heart rates or stress level hormones that are being pumped out in huge levels, and yet their conscious brain doesn't react to that, doesn't seem to acknowledge it, so they don't understand that they're stressed. So there's different ways that people can experience emotion, and I doubt that it's a universal thing, although I think that you might say that there'd be a lot of people that have this sort of euphoric response to certain things that they really, really love, or certain events or times in their lives where they had an event where they said that they felt in a unique way. So I think that part of it probably is.
And if there was a God, it would be universal, because everyone would be made exactly in his image, and we'd all have that potential, and that's not.
I don't know. Would it? Could there be a God that experiences itself in different ways with different people? I mean, I don't know that there is anything we can say about what a God would be or would do. I don't know what a God would be or do. And so it's really difficult for me to say that, if there was a God, it would be this. I don't know.
Right.
Sure, yeah. I would like to ask your opinion on Buddhism, especially esoteric Buddhism, that doesn't concern itself so much with there being a God, but still uses the term Buddha in a way that many people would understand as God. What is your opinion of that?
The main thing that I appreciate about Buddhism is just simply the concept of not being more attached to things than is merited. So for the example, the idea of liking or loving or attaching myself to something that I know is transient in a way that makes me feel like I'm going to be devastated if it's gone is something that is setting myself up for a great deal of pain when that thing is gone. So I think that the teaching as far as trying to help people understand that that life is filled with many transient things that kind of go on and change into other things. The idea that don't count on things to always be what they are and to always last. And I think that's a good lesson.
Right, and I think that is that attainment is what I think the esoteric Buddhism calls enlightenment. Is just that idea that you're not attached to things, that it's okay, that if the glass is already broken, I think is one of the
I mean, I think it's fine to be attached, but I think that attachment has to be informed, and you know,
Sure.
well, I don't think it has to be. Clearly, it doesn't have to be because many people don't. But I think
nothing has to be anything.
It helps you avoid a great deal of pain when you understand that some things go away, and that ultimately either you or they will go away from each other. So. Understanding that we're going to part ways with everything, ultimately, is a good thing to understand. Of illusion? You mean like the idea that the world is something that other than what it appears to be?
No.
Okay.
Not so much that. In Buddhism, the idea of illusion is that what we experience is not exactly as it is.
I think that's what I
interpret that as.
Was describing.
I guess I interpret that as saying that we can see what's around us, but we also know that there's atoms inside that we can't see. You know, that we don't see air, but we can demonstrate that it's there. It's the experience of it. You know.
Well, yeah, I think I don't know if people are that hung up on vision, but yes, demonstrable things we know are there. Things that can't be demonstrated, we don't know are there. I don't know how else to say. I'm going to go ahead and let this go. I think we need to move on to some other calls. We've talked about a lot of different things, and I do appreciate your call. It was an interesting call, and I'm glad that you called in. And
thank you.
I do, though, want to get to some other calls.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'd like to say thank you so much for having me on. It's wonderful to talk to you guys.
All right, have a good one, Bianca.